Hello everyone, this is Todd Murphy and welcome to my Jazz Arranging Masterclass. Today is part 2 of the approach techniques, and today we'll be doing a practical application. Now I've written out a melody and I've also given it some chord changes, and I wrote out a bass line so that I can hear what it sounds like when I'm finished. I like to listen to what I'm doing with the computer. It works a lot since I'm not really a piano player. And on the trombone, it's impossible to play chords. Not impossible, but very difficult. I use the computer, and I wrote out a melody line. And I purposely put in some notes that aren't really part of the chord scales so that I could take advantage of the approach techniques. And I'm going to do something very unusual that I normally wouldn't do. And that's I'm going to try to use all of the approach techniques that I've talked about before in the same 4-measure long melody. Not so easy to do and probably not such a good idea. Normally I would choose what I think to be the best approach technique. But today I'm going to force it a little bit. It should sound good anyways, but I've written in some outside notes to show you why we use approach techniques. And that's normally to harmonize notes that are outside of the chord scale. If you know your scales and which chord is associated with it or which chords, that will really help you with this kind of harmonizing technique. Alright, normally the first thing I would do, I would just go through the whole melody and identify the places where I could use an approach technique. So let's just go right through. The D's okay, that's okay. There we have a B natural, and that's coming down to a B flat. The B flat is part of the C7 sharp 11 chord, but the B natural would be one of the most outside notes. So in this case, I can just simply put an approach technique, a chromatic coming down to that B flat. Alright, so I'm going to do that. Here I have another note, this G natural, which probably would be a G flat, would be the sharp 11, but in this case a G natural, so I could also use an approach technique there. I'm going to use the minor third planing technique. Okay. Here's a little trick for you. Would you harmonize this D as part of the C7 sharp 11 chord or as part of the E minor 7 chord? And I hope you all said the E minor 7 chord, because in this case, when you have a rest and the chord changes exactly at the same time as the rest, and you have a eighth note anticipating that rest, normally we would anticipate the harmony as well. You could just imagine as if it was a D tied over to a D here. Of course, in that case, you would harmonize it as an E minor 7. So just imagine that it's tied over, and that way you can remember. Alright, the G, that's a beautiful note, no reason to use an approach technique. I'm gonna use one here, even though you don't really need one. It's possible, but it's not necessary. And here is a C sharp in an A minor chord, so that we need to use an approach technique. I'm gonna use the dominant here, the dominant approach technique. Alright, here is another place where I could use a chromatic approach technique. Here I'm going to use a diatonic. You see the diatonic, not just with a second, you can also use it with other intervals. You just have to kind of make all the intervals similar. In this case, it's going to come out being not really parallel, but I'm just going to use the diatonic notes of the D minor 7 chord. Alright, here we're going to put a diminished approach and end up with a parallel at the end. Alright, and I think that just about wraps it up. That we got them all there, don't we? Chromatic, minor third planing, dominant, diminished, diatonic, and parallel. Yeah, I think that's about it. So, I've marked these places, and I like to work backwards. I'm going to start at the end and go backwards, which makes perfect sense because normally the approach technique, you would harmonize the target chord first, and then go back and do the approach technique. Alright, so we're just moving right along here. And just fill that in. And here we're going to put the parallel. All major seconds coming down. F sharp to E, E to D, C sharp to B natural. Alright. normal chord, and just a normal chord. I'm doing all these in block closed position. Would work good for trumpets. Normally we write 4 trumpets in the closed position to get a good balance. If you go too much more than an octave, it starts to become unbalanced because the first trumpet will be much more intense than the 4th trumpet if he's in a really low register. So keep that in mind. Trumpets work best in closed formation or in triads. I use a lot of triads too. When you're using trombones and saxes with the trumpets, you can put the trumpets in triads and then double the melody on the 4th trumpet, and that also works very well. And it's much more modern sounding than this technique I'm using now. Alright, now we just put all diminished thirds here. E flat to G flat, C to E flat, and A to C, a full diminished chord. You can experiment with the half diminished chord as well. It works pretty well. We'll just harmonize that out normally. Alright, here I'm going to put a diatonic approach technique. As you see, the B natural is a kind of an avoid note in this chord. So if you harmonized it as a D minor 7 chord, it might not work so well. So I'm just going to put all diatonic thirds coming up here. You can see it works out good. I got a D to an F, that's a minor third, and an F to an A, that gives me a major third. So we're mixing the intervals. You can see it's not parallel at all. It's moving in minor thirds and major thirds at the same time. We'll just voice that out. D minor 7 chord. You can see there I put the 9th in to rub against that F. Very beautiful chord. In this position it works nice. And here I'm just going to come down chromatically like that. All chromatic intervals, the minor 2nd. And that will be a complete chromatic planing effect. Alright, I'm going to voice this out. It's just going to come down and back up again. Now, what would be the dominant coming into an A minor 7 chord? Well, that would be an E7 chord. In this case, I'm going to use the Lydian dominant of the chord. Alright, there you go. You can see it's not in the root position, but that's okay. It still gives you the dominant effect coming into the A minor 7 chord. Here I'll just use the same chord again. Alright. All diatonic. No need to use an approach technique there. Okay, coming into the first measure, there, like I said, I'm going to harmonize this as an E minor 7 chord. There we go. That should actually be an F sharp. That's okay. I'll put that in. Voice that out, and here we use the minor 3rd planing. Very beautiful. There we go. Voice out the B flat, I'm sorry. And the chromatic. As you can see, it takes a little time, but it's not really that difficult once you get the hang of it. Voice those out, and there we go. Oh, there we have it. We've used the chromatic, the minor 3rd planing, the dominant, chromatic again, the diatonic, the diminished, and the parallel. Probably the most used, as I've said before, is the chromatic and the parallel. But I like to mix it up as best I can and try and make it as colorful as possible. So if you can find places to use as many of the techniques as possible, it's probably a good idea. Well, there we have it. I'm going to put that F sharp back in there. Now we can just listen to it. I'm going to play it for you, see how it sounds. Thank you for your time. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.